Hello and welcome to Applicata Biblia. My name is Mark. Thank you so much for stopping by. We're going to get a little bit into God's Word. We are in a walk through the Bible. We are in lesson 71. We are in this part of the study where we're just kind of looking at the people. We looked at Jesus a little bit, and we are also looking at the people around Jesus and people that are going to be important in his life in one form or another. We looked at the writers in another section. We looked a little bit at the disciples in the last one and how it is that Jesus chose them. Now we have to remember these 12 men that Jesus chooses to be his disciples are basically going to change the entire world. So it doesn't go unnoticed that Jesus chooses just regular people because it's God that's going to be changing the world. It's not them. Now, obviously, God uses them. And if it had not been from God, it never would have worked. Okay, but what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about who were the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Zealots, and the Essenes. Now, this is just some of these different sects of people within Israel at the time. We have to remember something, because in my mind, understanding the culture and getting our heads into the culture will help us understand what they may have been thinking about things, or maybe what they were looking for, like we just talked about, that the disciples were looking for the Messiah, and how that is attached to their own history. But what is going on politically, right? Politics ruins everything, I think. And it's no different in that day. Now, Rome is their unfortunately, they are what I would call a vassal state. In other words, they're allowed to be a nation and rule themselves as long as it agrees with Rome. Okay? Rome has complete power over them. They don't like it. And it makes sense, right? And if you ever look at the history of it, you can see that there's all kinds of atrocities that happens with the temple and all that. When, every time somebody comes to conquer Israel, there's all kinds of things that happens like that. But by and large, the people don't like being an occupied country. I mean, if you live in the U.S., you've never had to understand or know what it means to have another country occupying you and telling you what to do, and maybe removing all of your rights and freedoms and overtaxing you and doing like they're not already. But but that's what's going on. So who are the scribes? Well, the scribes were well respected because they were part of the elites. Let's understand this. Israel is still a theocracy. They are governed by whatever God said in the Old Testament and with their covenant with God through Moses. Remember a long time ago we talked about Moses. Okay, that goes way, way back. That was very early on. They are still living under that law. Now, they've taken it and they've made it so difficult to work. They've started interpreting that law and made it almost impossible to achieve. Unless you're one of the elites, right? So the scribes are the ones who write the law. And so why is that important? Well, because if you're writing it, you know what it is. And it was a very meticulous job to have. If you were, it's not like they had paper and stuff like we do today. Whatever it was they were writing on, it might have been some sort of paper or whatever. Actually, I'm not even sure. It might have been animal hides or whatever. Whatever they were writing on, if they made a mistake, they had to throw it away and start over. So it is a meticulous job. So what happens when you do that? Well, if that's the way you have to work, you get to learn the law. You are studying the law. Imagine writing out the Bible. You would learn a lot about the Bible if you had to write it out. That's what they did. So these people are well respected. They're scholarly about the scriptures. And so they're very much part of the hierarchy that we're looking at. And what about the Pharisees? Now the Pharisees, I talked briefly about that. They are part of the elite as well. They are scholarly. They have money. Typically, they have time to study, right? Most people are just trying to work. Pharisees typically are well off, and they are well respected. People respect their Pharisees. And I talked about how you would call them, you would say, hello, pious one. You would greet them in a very honorable way. Now, what about the Sadducees? Well, the Sadducees are very well respected too. These are people in political power, so they are attached to Rome some way, in some fashion. The only reason why they have any power is because of Rome, in one fashion or another. We talked about Herod. Now, Herod wasn't even a Jew, but he would be part, maybe he or Rome or somebody would be part of choosing who the high priests were, right? The high priests are very important during that day. All priests are important, but the high priests are really important. They're the ones passing judgment on people if they are to be executed and that sort of thing. So all of this is, playing out during the time of Jesus. All these people will have a say about Jesus as well. If Jesus is the Christ, and he's not going to deliver some sort of great war to get back their power, they don't want any part of it. Okay, so the Sadducees and Pharisees differ on what they believe, and the Pharisees themselves have issues in between them. They have two big schools. One is Shammai, one is Gamaliel. Gamaliel is a little more liberal in his thinking. Shammai or Shammai, or whatever, I hope I'm not butchering his name. He's very, very much conservative. Nobody else can be a Jew except you're born that way. And all these other, you have to do this, you have to, strict adherence to the law. And the Pharisees start making up things about their interpretations and binding those things on the people as well. Sadducees are very powerful. They are a very powerful force, and we see later that the Sadducees just caused Paul grief time after time after time. So these are the two things, the Zealots and the Essenes. Now the Essenes are kind of a behind-the-scenes people. They are kind of, and this is just from what I've read, they are kind of, they want to study the Bible, they want to study the scriptures, and they do write out their own scriptures, and they say that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls come from. At least that's what I've read. I don't know how true that is, so take that with a grain of salt. We don't see a lot about them in the scriptures, but they essentially detach themselves from culture, from everyday life. They don't want to live in the city. They want to live outward and live a simple life. They don't want a lot of things. They just want to please God and that sort of thing. And I'm not going to get into any great detail. I just read a little bit about them. But that faction is within Israel at the time. And then we see the Zealots. What's a Zealot? Well, the Zealots were alive during that day, and they were basically what we would call today radicals, right? Against the government. They didn't like Rome. They felt like Rome doesn't respect God, and because of that, and they don't respect us. They don't respect our customs. We want to get rid of them. And they would, a lot of times, resort to violence. It wasn't uncommon to resort to violence. So that's the Zealots. So all of these people are out there, at this time. It's you know, it's just culture, that's all. So the first thing we're going to look at is, what does Jesus say about the scribes and Pharisees? And he's saying these woes, right, in Matthew 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithes of mint and dill and cumin, and you have left aside the weightier matters of the law, judgment and mercy and faith, which he is bringing in, right? It was right to do these and not to have left those aside. Blind guides straining out the gnat, but swallowing the camel. So he's showing their hypocrisy. This is what Jesus is calling them. He says, you guys, you're just doing this to uplift you. You don't care about the people. You're binding all these laws on people, and you're unjust. Where's your faith? Where's your mercy? He's saying that. Where's your mercy? Right? What does Jesus show us? Jesus shows us that God's a merciful God. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and of the dish, but within they are full of robbery and excess. So they're stealing from the people. Blind Pharisee, first cleanse the inside of the cup of the dish, and the outside of them may become clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitened grave, which outwardly indeed appear beautiful, but within are full of bones and the dead, and of all uncleanness. So he's saying you look one way on the outside, everybody respects you for whatever, but inside you're dead. You're full of death. And that is like, wow. And so we have to understand this. Jesus is saying this directly to these people, and they have control over his life. So you also indeed outwardly appear righteous to men, but within are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So he takes the case publicly against the elites, and in a few lessons we're going to see what happens to him because of it. In Matthew 22:23, what main belief do the Sadducees have different from the Pharisees? On that day, Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to him and they questioned him. Now, this was part of what Jesus is doing, right? Jesus is going around, he's teaching like in the temple. He's in the temple teaching people. This is where the elites are. This is their place. This is their house. This is how they see it. This is how we're gaining control of everybody. And he's teaching people about God and about the kingdom. And they come and they start asking him questions, trying to make him look bad. And it really is a very interesting tactic. And it's basically like any political tactic, right? If you can get 10% of the people on your side, just point out one thing about that guy and get 10% of the people on your side because of that one thing. You've gained those 10 people and you've taken them away from them. Then do it again with this other thing. Get 10 or 15% more people. And they keep asking Jesus, trying to get him to trip up and look bad. Every time he answers them eloquently and makes them look like idiots. So in this instance, I just bring up the point that the Sadducees believe something different than the Pharisees, and I always found it fascinating. They don't believe in the resurrection. They believe that once you're dead, you're dead. They're basically atheists. Why would you even believe in God? I don't know. But they have somehow positioned themselves in power, and yet they don't give God his due for the afterlife. They're just like, yeah, once you're gone, you're gone. Which is probably one of the reasons why, being rich was fine with them. We can be rich because after this, we're all gone anyway. I don't know if that was it, but certainly we see that was happening in that day. That happens even today. Luke 6:15, what was a zealot? I've already described that. Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called Zelotes, or the zealot. So even one of the disciples in this instance is called a zealot. Now, some people dispute that and say, well, he wasn't a zealot, typical. He wasn't a real zealot. It's like, how do you know? You just made that up. It says it. So, and that's what that word means. It means jealous. It means jealous. And that was the term used for the zealots of the time. So I don't know why anybody would question that. If Simon was a zealot, he was a zealot. There was a program that came on recently, and they show Simon being trained to kill, and he's this radical and all this, and he becomes follower of Jesus. I think that's probably pretty close. Because a lot of people just didn't like the fact that Rome was ruling them. They weren't a nation of their own. And they, like, we're God's people. What's this? That's how they were saying it. So I asked the question, find out who the Essenes were. I already talked about that. They were just sort of this, they were kind of lived a monastic life of being separated from money and riches and things, and lived a simple life and just studied the scriptures. So, John the Baptist is said to be something of an Essene, although he's not called an Essene, because he's out in the desert. He's detached himself from city life. He's out there living, wearing simple clothes, eating simple food, right? Locust and honey. Ugh. So he's been called, it's been said that he might have been one, but I don't know. So what was the Sanhedrin Council? Okay, and describe the authoritative body shown in this verse. And immediately in the morning, the chief priests with the elders and scribes and all the Sanhedrin, having made a council, having bound Jesus, they led him away and delivered him to Pilate. So this is at the end of Jesus' life. And I just bring this up because we see all of these people who have control over your life. They have control over the disciples' lives. They have the control over Jesus' life. And they just arrest him. The temple had their own temple guards. They had their own police force. I talked a little bit about that. When Paul was persecuting the church, they go out and they arrest Jesus. Now the Sanhedrin was likely had, like, the high priest was in there and probably some other priests. And the most notable of notables was in that council. And they made decisions concerning laws. They made concerning judgments concerning what should happen to you because you did X, X, and X. And they would look at their law and say, here's what needs to happen to you. So that was the Sanhedrin. They were of the elites. They are not just regular guys like you and me. Just, trying to make a living. They were elites in that time. And because of that, they have power. And so that really shapes the life of Jesus. And as we see it unfold. Okay, that kind of covers that part of it. There's a lot more nuances to all of this. What I'm saying here doesn't cover everything, but there are other things. But that really kind of gets to the core of it. Thank you so much for stopping by. We'll see you in the next one.